Hello, everyone. This video is the final part of the Red VHS storyline. If you haven't checked out the first two videos, I recommend you do before watching this one, to catch up on the full story. If you enjoyed, I do hope you leave a like and a subscribe, and do leave a comment with your thoughts. Now, without further ado, let's get to the story. Enjoy. The world outside was now dark and gray from the cloud cover. Soon, it would begin to rain. We had all gathered in the large main room of the cabin-turned-police station. My family, Cartwright, and the other two less useful troopers. After cussing them out for a healthy amount of time, Cartwright told Serrano, the young one, to grab his laptop from the office. While the young trooper went off grumbling to do so, Cartwright relayed Isabel's realization to the group. "So we can just track the phone?" my grandfather asked. I explained to him that all I had to do was log into a website online, and using that we could get a GPS location of where the phone was. "And where the phone is, maybe the hunter is," Thomas concluded. "But what if he just ditched the phone?" "He might have," I reasoned, "but maybe he doesn't know about it. I mean, he's been in prison for a long time, right? Technology has changed since then." "I didn't know about it," Grandpa added, "and I haven't even been to jail. If he knows, then he probably would have ditched it by now. If the phone isn't moving on the map, then that's probably what's happened," I continued. "But if he's on the move, we'll be one step ahead of him," Thomas concluded. "And with the numbers advantage and the arms advantage, this guy's toast," Cartwright assured. Serrano set down the bulky out-of-date laptop on the round table we'd been sitting on. I logged into the website to find my phone. The marker on the map was still at the motel, which confused Cartwright, but he explained that he may have missed it, or that the hunter dropped it somewhere nearby. I asked him when he called the number and when the man picked up. Cartwright pulled up his phone log to be sure. That wasn't too long after the incident, but why would he hang around the scene of the crime for so long? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he hung around in the woods, but just close enough to ambush you if you tried to come back. If you brought your grandfather along to help. "Was no one else at the motel?" Isabel asked. I shook my head. "It's not tourist season, and why else would someone stay in this place? I had to call the owner, insist that he came down to give me a key. Waiting in the Ranger was horrifying, but..." "I called that guy," Cartwright interrupted, then apologized for doing so. "When I saw the motel and the wreckage as I drove past it, I told him to be careful but to get down there as quickly as he could." We discussed the issue for a while longer. Then the problem of the flash drive was brought up. Should we watch it? Thomas and Isabel argued that even the gear wasn't secure enough to risk the hunter knowing our location. Grandma agreed. Grandpa wanted to hear what the hunter had to say, but eventually relented once he realized he was alone in the matter. "If we catch this guy without playing his game, that's the best possible outcome," Cartwright reasoned. "All his speech is gonna do is rile us up and skew our mission. We have a good plan, as long as he held onto the phone. Now we just wait and see." The mood in the air lessened. I felt the flash drive shifting in my pocket when I moved. Serrano took the opportunity to apologize to me for his behavior the previous day. He explained that in all his years of being in this town, nothing had ever happened. Mostly it was false reports and wasting time. Our conversation was interrupted when the older trooper captured everyone's attention. "You might want to see this," Hinton said. He turned the laptop to show us the marker on the GPS was now moving away from its resting spot and onto the highway. "Guess he got sick of waiting." "Hinton, Serrano, you're both with me," demanded Cartwright. "Suit up, full kits. We're getting this SOB and we're doing it quickly." He turned to the five of us. "Can't have y'all coming with me. It's too dangerous." He received no complaint from us. Then he told Thomas, Isabel, and I to follow him deeper into the station. He unlocked a door to reveal a windowless room filled with guns and ammunition. "I expect the guns back," he said. "The bullets, though, those are for the hunter to keep if he shows up." He winked at us and patted Thomas on the shoulder. We grabbed a rifle or shotgun each, a handgun to match, including 2 for Grandma and Grandpa. While he shuffled through the boxes of ammunition to find the corresponding packages, Thomas chuckled. "What's up?" I asked, slipping some boxes into a large hiking backpack. "You think this is the real reason Gramps always took us out hunting? Made sure we knew guns?" I thought it over and found myself chuckling as well. As we unloaded all of the arms onto the large round table that we'd gathered around earlier, Cartwright gave us some final words. "The sun's going down. Get some rest, but you might want to leave some lookouts awake. The cameras keep an eye all around the station. We left the door to the security room unlocked so you can see the screens. I'm sorry we didn't have any vests for y'all. Only got 3 and they're fitted for us." He looked around seriously at each of us. "You cannot, let me stress this, you cannot be too careful tonight. Make sure someone has an eye on those screens at all times." "Cartwright," I said just as he was about to walk through the door. I shot him 2 times, straight to the chest, and he kept walking. He nodded. "He's probably wearing a vest under that coat of his." He barely even flinched though, and they weren't far away shots either. Virtually point blank. Rifle too. Just don't underestimate him. He nodded in agreement. Then, with a casual salute, he was gone. They took each of their SUVs, leaving us with only the van at the edge of the dirt driveway. Thomas went over and deadlocked the front door. As he did, he looked out the window at the blackened sky and the blurry concealed sun as it touched the tree line. "It's starting to rain," he said. Drops of liquid soon decorated the glass panes as if to prove him right. The similarities to that first encounter with the hunter made my stomach uneasy. Could it be so easy? Would the 3 troopers catch the hunter by surprise? My mind went back to what the hunter said to me, what I had relayed to Cartwright. "I underestimated you." Would he really underestimate us again? I pondered these questions as I helped my grandfather out of his wheelchair and into the bed of one of the rooms. The police station had it so that the troopers could stay overnight if needed. He cried in pain for the few steps to the bed. As he collapsed down, he laughed a little while blinking the tears from his eyes. "It just occurred to me that I can finally tell you why I have all these back problems," he said. "You told me it was all those years with the oil company." "I didn't lie, but that's not where it started. After the incident with the 3 of you and Okotnik, I tracked him down. We had a shootout and he got me right near the spine. I'm surprised he didn't paralyze me. Then, once he was off to prison, I went back to working at the oil rig. Only the work was a lot harder. Too many years of that and, well, I was really happy when I finally retired." He smiled at me brightly, expecting a response. I didn't give one. After the story, I simply said goodnight and went to leave the room. On the way out, I passed my grandmother who was coming in. She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, one that turned into an embrace. I sighed, said I loved them, and went back to the main room with Thomas and Isabel. "Do you forgive him?" Isabel asked me from the leather couch she rested on. It had been an hour of mostly silence. I stared through the open door to the room where my grandparents slept. The questions about my mother and how much of the blame was on my grandfather had been swirling through my head since Cartwright left. "I don't know," I said. "I don't even know if I blame him in the first place. Maybe I do." I shifted my spot at the table and buried my head in my hands, deep in thought. I don't think I'll be able to make sense of it until the hunter is put away at least, and maybe not for a while after. My whole life I thought my mom was the one to blame. I thought Grandma and Grandpa were saints for taking me in. That hasn't changed necessarily, Isabel said carefully. They did still take care of you. They did still help your mom go to rehab. She wouldn't have had to if Grandpa didn't bring drugs through town to begin with. After a moment I sighed and lifted my head again. Before Isabel could speak, I said, I know. He couldn't have foreseen what would happen. Even if he wanted to get out, it's not like it was easy. I mean, look where we are now. You think those guys are gonna get him? Thomas asked. He was just near enough to hear the conversation, inside the security room with the door open, examining the screens. I looked down at the laptop with the map pulled up. Cartwright had taken his phone with him. I logged into the website on that so he could more easily track the hunter on the move. The marker had come to a rest in a house on the edge of town. For a while, it continued to move around the vicinity, but now it had remained in one place. There's something moving on the screen, Thomas said. Isabel instantly shot up from her resting state. I took my attention away from the laptop. What is it? I'm not sure. Just some moving in the bushes right now. It's really hard to tell with how dark the screens are. The two of us joined Thomas in the security room. He was right about the vision. Not only the darkness, but also the storm. Very little could be seen. Then, just barely, we caught sight of it. We each sighed in relief and shared some mild, awkward laughter at the sight of a cow moose. Isabel went to lay on the couch again after a while. She hadn't slept much on the plane ride and was exhausted. I kept Thomas company in the security room. We talked for the better part of an hour about everything we could think of. The revelation of our grandfather's past. The refutation of all the ideas of imagined experiences. And the realization that both of us were starving. Thomas left the room to rummage through the fridge for something to eat. That's when everything went to hell. Complete darkness filled the cabin. All of the security screens went black at once. The lights out. The open fridge now dark. For a moment, neither of us reacted. Then we sprang into action, waking each of our sleeping family members. Confusion was the shared experience. Was it a storm? A simple yet terrifying coincidence. We each grabbed our guns. We each threw our bags of ammo over our shoulder. We mounted ourselves around the table as Grandma helped Grandpa to his chair. Then came the smell. A smoky scent that stung our nostrils. "Fire!" Thomas shouted. Sure enough, the walls of the hallway that led deeper into the cabin were lit by a crimson glow of open flame. As the wicked heat and smoke began to fill the main room, we panicked. We asked each other what to do and where to go. The sinking dread of the realization that this could be no coincidence sank in. "To the van!" Grandpa shouted over our yelling. "We have to get to the van! Go!" Into the harsh rains we went. Thomas took the keys and ran through the mud to unlock the doors and turn on the vehicle. Then he stood guard, his gun held high and looking every which way. Isabel helped Grandma through the mud to the van where they began to lower the ramp. They yelled at me to hurry, but the thin wheels of my grandfather's chair digging deep into the slippery, sticky earth slowed me immensely. "Leave me!" he yelled. "It's me he wants, damn it, leave me!" But I wouldn't. I dragged the chair behind myself as I plowed through the muddy driveway, and then a sudden cracking noise filled the air. It was not thunder. The sound was followed by a shrill and haunting screech. A scream which I will never forget. Isabel pulled Grandma into the van. Grandma, who laid on her lap, a splotch of blood spreading through her apron. My grandfather yelled and cried in a way I had never heard before. With the adrenaline now at a peak, I was able to drag the wheelchair to the van. As Thomas shot into the woods, I shoved Grandpa's chair in, pushed the ramp up, closed the door, and got in the passenger's side. With his shotgun now empty, Thomas jumped into the driver's seat. He peeled away, kicking up mud and swerving his way onto the main road. I looked to the back seat to see my grandmother, thankfully still conscious. Grandpa held her hand and cried, completely unintelligible. "Get to the hospital!" I yelled. I prayed it would be enough. Grandma tried to soothe us, though her voice was getting faint. Isabel ran her fingers through the copper and silver locks of her hair. For a moment nothing at all existed as I watched the color fade from the woman who raised me. Thomas broke the trance with a yell. "Behind us!" I snapped my head to see through the mirror a pair of bright headlights quickly approaching us. I pulled my handgun from its holster. "Is it him?" Isabel asked. She was answered by the sudden jolt of the van being slammed into by a heavy truck. I rolled down my window and leaned out with my gun drawn. I emptied the magazine towards the truck. A few shots hit the vehicle but mostly ricocheted off the wet asphalt of the highway. I pulled myself back into the van to reload. My hair was dripping from the downfall outside. The inside of the door was soaked and slicked from being opened so long in such a storm. "Drive steady," I said. I once again leaned out of the van, this time going so far as to sit on the windowsill and hold tightly onto the van's cargo bar to keep from falling. "Be careful!" Thomas yelled as the truck veered off to the side. I saw the hunter driving. He wore his wooden mask even now. I steadied my gun at him just as he lifted his upon me. 2 resounding shots rang out, and 2 bullets landed. Both of us missed our mark. The side mirror below me cracked and fell onto the road. The truck decelerated rapidly. I had flattened one of his tires at least. I watched as the vehicle came to a stop, and as the lights faded in the storm. "I'll kill the son of a bitch, I'll kill him!" Grandpa yelled all the way to the hospital. We got there just in time. The few members of the medical staff in the building were able to steady Grandma's vitals. "We have to life flight her to Anchorage," a nurse told us grandchildren, just outside of the emergency room. "Only one person can fit in the helicopter with her, considering how many of the medical staff needs to go with her." We discussed it amongst the family and decided that Isabel should accompany her. The main reason being that Grandpa refused to leave town until the hunter was dead. The 3 of us watched from the rooftop as the helicopter took flight and slowly faded into the now rising sun as the clouds of rain dispersed. Then, as we stood on the wet cement roof of the hospital, we saw the lights of the 3 AST vehicles pulling into the parking lot. We met the 3 officers by the front door. I could tell from the look on his face that Cartwright was utterly distraught. Before he could explain what happened, Grandpa flew into a rage. Wheeling himself towards them, he screamed and cursed at the officers. He denounced them for failing to protect us, failing to protect my grandmother. As Cartwright's head hung low in despair, I couldn't help as my own emotions bubbled to the surface. "No, you don't get to be angry," I shouted at the old man in the chair. "None of this would be happening if it wasn't for you. You almost got us killed as children. You almost got my grandma killed. And you did kill my mother. All of us here picking up after you. So don't just sit there, useless, while the rest of us try and fix it." Tears streamed down my face. I could hardly see. I could hardly think. And soon I could hardly speak. As my throat closed tight from emotion, as my tongue stumbled over the words, I gave up and turned away, back to the van. I cried. I cried with my head hung low until I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I looked up to see Thomas. He said nothing, but through my tears I saw that he was crying as well. I rested my head on his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around me. We didn't find the truck on the highway back to the station. The hunter must have thrown on a spare. I rode with Cartwright. I wanted to keep some distance from my grandfather. The whole drive back, Cartwright told me about what had happened after they left to track the hunter down. The GPS led them to a house on the edge of town. They slowly surrounded it before knocking the front door and back doors down simultaneously. The house belonged to the motel owner. After talking to him for a while, they figured out what had happened. The hunter must have answered the phone while hiding inside of the office. The owner said that the door had been unlocked when he got there, despite him always leaving it secured. Once the hunter realized the police were involved, he slipped the phone into the pocket of a coat left behind in there. When the owner arrived, the hunter was gone. None the wiser, he grabbed the coat, thinking nothing of it, and went back home. We had tracked the owner as a distraction. We underestimated him, I said, staring distantly into the trees. And we paid for it. The SUV pulled into the driveway of the now charred police station. It was followed by other 3 vehicles. As we stepped closer to the ruins of the cabin, a single white square caught my eye. I walked up to it, picked it up, and brushed away the soot. Thomas wheeled my grandfather forward. The 3 of us and the police looked at the paper. The very same newspaper that had reported the warehouse explosion, taken from my grandparents' house and placed here at the scene. The ink had leaked and dried, like faded charcoal tears on the parchment. My grandfather sighed. I know where to go. The drive was a long one down the coastal highway. Jagged snowy peaks peered over the vast expanse of green vegetation on black rock. The tall pine trees of the forest near our hometown grew sparser and sparser until they were completely gone. As the salty waves battered the rocky cliffs near us, Thomas, Grandpa, and I discussed the situation. Grandpa explained to us that the hunter wanted to face off at the site of the explosion that had started it all. It was a pair of warehouses on a lot near the coast. The plot of land the warehouses were built on was hidden below the cliffs the long highway expanded over. It was built there to be hidden in plain sight. Most wouldn't see it. It would be tucked away beneath the rocky cliffs as they drove by. Those that did see it wouldn't think anything of it. That is where the Russians had met Grandpa to store and sail the cargo to cross through the Bering Sea. We had almost missed the warehouses, but Grandpa never forgot the scenery. Although there was a little to work with, he knew. We stood on the cliff overlooking the remains of the charred and abandoned warehouse. Next to it was a still intact, but no less abandoned copy. As I stared down at it, I wondered if the hunter was inside, if he was waiting for us to enter or if he waited somewhere on the outskirts. He had no woods to hide in this time. The black pickup truck was alone in the gravel parking lot. Bullet holes marked the metal body, medals from the firefight the night before. Or was it earlier this morning? I couldn't be sure. As we looked down over the lot and over the chilly sea, Thomas asked the most obvious question, the one that was on all our minds. What if he just blows it up? What if he just wants revenge for last time? My grandfather sat in his chair overlooking the warehouse. He probably wants to. He means to take my family from me before finishing the job. That's why he shot your grandmother. He could have easily taken me, but instead he turned the gun on the love of my life and tried to snuff her out. His rough and wrinkled fingers dug into the arms of the chair, a subtle sign of rage in his otherwise stoic demeanor. That's why we can't have you two following me in. Not only is it stupid, it's probably exactly what he wants. Thomas and I argued, but Cartwright took Grandpa's side. He said it would be foolish for anyone to go in when we could wait for him outside. We don't take unnecessary risks, Cartwright said. He'll have to come out eventually. We surround the warehouse and wait. We can't. The warehouse is still full of canned food and other non-perishables, my grandfather explained. It's probably been his base of operations. With this new information, we decided to set up defensive positions. Hinton and Serrano remained on the cliff, one covering the back and one covering the front. They would have bird's-eye views to overlook the lot. Grandpa showed Cartwright a way down with the van. He took us with, but we remained in the van, ready to make an escape if necessary. That's what we told them, at least. Are we gonna just watch? Thomas asked me as our grandfather wheeled himself ever closer to the metal-encased pole barn. Cartwright followed behind. We told Grandpa we would stay out of harm's reach. As my grandfather looked over his shoulder at us in the distance, then disappeared into the warehouse, I said, "Doesn't mean we will, though." I grabbed my gun and Thomas did the same. As the doors to the van closed, I told him we would look for an entrance at the back and cut the man in the mask off if necessary. With a light jog, we scampered across the lot to a metal wall of the warehouse. We justified with each other that it made no sense to not use every person available. The two troopers had sight. But what if they missed? "You think it's unlocked?" I whispered to Thomas while gesturing at a set of graded steps that led up to a door on the back of the metal shed. He was staring at the charred skeleton of the twin warehouse that was destroyed so many years ago. "Only one way to find out," he said. Up the steps and to the red-painted door we snuck. As we moved, we heard the faint sound of the overhead door my grandfather had gone into, closing with considerable squeaking from its age. I asked what Thomas could see through the small square window in the center of the heavy metal door. He told me it was nothing but darkness. Tentatively he tried the handle, and slowly it turned. The inside of the building was dark, with only faint rays of light coming from the cracks in the roof, doors, or walls. The singular room of the warehouse was filled with rows of metal shelving holding pallets of canned food and several appliances. The catwalk our door led into circled the whole warehouse, a perfect inner vantage point. "Why did he pick a spot so easy for us to get an advantage in?" I asked. "He seems to care about the story of it all," Thomas replied. "If he just wanted us dead, with no fuss, we wouldn't have made it past elementary school." We stepped in carefully and quietly. Although we wanted to remain up top to keep a strong position against the hunter, we could see very little. From some location in the echoing warehouse, we could hear a conversation between two men speaking in Russian. Well, he's not dead yet, I thought. For a moment, we only listened to the distant conversation before I told Thomas, through the quietest whisper I could manage, that I wanted to get closer in case he needed help. He argued with me immediately. He said we were close as we needed to be without risking being seen. I heeded his advice only momentarily before I began to descend down the steps. "I'm not following you," he said quietly. "Good. Look for a better vantage point." Through dusty, mildewed rows of crates and pallets I snuck, slowly and thoughtfully so my steps would not give me away. I crept closer to the sound of conversation. I wondered why I could not hear the voice of the old trooper when I felt a pair of hands grasp me and cover my mouth. "You're not sticking to the plan," Cartwright whispered furiously. He slowly let me go and non-verbally directed my attention to something. I saw the jumbled mess of homemade explosives on one of the steel supports of the building. "How many?" I mouthed more than spoke. He held up 7 fingers and gestured to 7 different spots. "Can we disarm them?" Cartwright did not answer immediately. Then he asked me if it was worth the risk. I shrugged and whispered back, "It's either get blown up now or get blown up later. We could try and get close to him, take him out with a headshot. And if he hears us coming and decides to self-destruct, Let's take our chances with the bombs first. Tom is on the catwalk. Maybe he'll find a shot. But if not, our best bet is getting these things out of commission." Cartwright nodded, though he didn't look entirely pleased. I understood the hesitation. I wasn't entirely on board with the plan either, but it at least was a plan and not a Hail Mary. Then, as I approached the mess of explosives and wires, pocket knife out and ready, I wondered if this wasn't also just a different form of Hail Mary. I'm not very religious, but I can say without shame that I prayed before I cut the wire. Slowly, the blade dug into the rubber. Slowly, I pushed deeper, waiting for the inevitable end of my life. As my blade cut completely through, my heart stopped momentarily. But when no explosion came, I relaxed. "Now just to do it 6 more times," I whispered. Cartwright took his own pocket knife out and went around disarming others. Just after I had cut through my second wire, I heard the conversation between my grandfather and the hunter get louder and angrier. Then I heard a commotion and a thud. My grandfather yelled, "Do it then, you son of a bitch!" Without thinking, I immediately moved towards the noise with my gun drawn. I got to the part of the warehouse where the shelving stopped and saw my grandfather sprawled on the dirty concrete floor. He looked up at me in shock. "No, you weren't supposed to be here!" Then the loud crack of a gun went off. Thomas, from his position on the catwalk, had fired at a hunter who stood just behind me. I stared at the man in his mask. He held his arm as blood spilled from it. I knew he wasn't invincible. This confirmed it. My childhood fears fell away as I swung the butt of my rifle at his head and knocked him backward. Onto the ground he fell, and I aimed my rifle at him. Just briefly, I heard him laugh. Then, the whole warehouse collapsed. Sheet metal and supports collapsed down on us. Shelves and their contents spilled under the weight. I heard nothing but a noise so loud it deafened me. I coughed up dust, now pinned prone to the ground. I reconnected to reality, with nothing but ringing in my ears and a sharp pain in my leg. As the ringing faded, and more of the world became clearer, I heard several competing shouts. I heard my grandfather crying and begging for us to be okay. I heard Thomas far off in the distance, calling out to us. Then, as I saw the large frame of the hunter making his way through the rubble towards me, I heard the bellow of Officer Cartwright tackling him to the ground. My grandfather called my name and I saw him dragging himself towards me. "Can you get up?" he asked us as Cartwright and the hunter wrestled. "My leg," I stammered. "My leg is pinned." He pushed aside shattered planks of wood and lifted sheets of metal to get closer. He embraced me for a moment, and I felt the tears from his eyes wash the dust from my cheeks. He told me he would get me free. Then he found a metal rod and pried the support beam which pinned me up, just enough for me to slide out. "I won't be able to walk," I said. "Then crawl out. Get out of here." Not without taking down that fucker. He played this trick. Now he's vulnerable. We all survived. Then I heard another distinctive blast that could only be a gunshot. I pulled myself up onto a spilt crate of VHS tapes to see through the floating dust and rays of sunlight through the collapsed roof. I saw Cartwright's body on the ground. He had been shot in the upper chest, or was it the neck? He held his collar tightly and could not speak. Blood spilled through his fingers. Then the hunter turned to see me. Only then did I realize I had no gun. It had been lost in the explosion. The hunter lifted his own pistol and aimed it at me. I looked down the black barrel of the gun that would take my life. But the shot missed. It missed because at the last second the hunter was thrown off by an old man biting down hard into his leg. My grandfather had saved my life. The hunter did not appreciate it. He kicked my grandfather hard in the face, surely breaking his nose. Then he turned his attention back to me. He threw his gun aside as he approached me. As I watched the haunting image of the figure masked behind a wooden facade, my entire body wanted to freeze. I knew I could not. I pulled my pocket knife out, now my only weapon. As if to challenge me, the man in the wooden mask pulled out a blade the size of my forearm. Ducking under beams and crawling over boxes, he moved towards me. His sinister eyes never moved from mine. Then I felt his massive hand grab onto my throat. He began to choke me, to see the life drain from my face. I slashed away at his torso, but my minuscule blade couldn't even puncture his coat. Black spots filled my vision. I became lightheaded and only barely heard laughing. Laughing cut short by the sudden sound of chains, and then his grip loosened, and then fully fell on my throat. I gasped for air and saw my grandfather. For the first time in a long time, I saw him standing completely upright and from his own volition. I saw the pain in his eyes as he wrestled the life from the hunter. I saw a rusty chain just below the wooden mask. It caught the gray yarn beard in its links. The man in the mask stabbed my grandfather repeatedly in the side, trying desperately to loosen his grip. But as they both fell to the ground, my grandfather refused to let his hold go. The man in the wooden mask stared at me through the holes in the carved baggy eyes. For the first time, I saw fear in the opposite direction. As I pulled my body through the debris, I realized that neither of them would survive. My grandpa could not last that many stabs to his body. The hunter violently fought until at last the swinging blade slowed in tempo, and the knife fell to the ground. His last words were nothing more than gargled gasps for air, so similar to what I'd heard on that film as a child. Finally, I pulled myself over the crate of tapes, plastic breaking underneath me, to get to the two. Thomas called in the background. I heard him ripping metal and debris away, desperately looking for a path in. Together we threw the hunter's lifeless corpse aside. My grandfather was still alive, but not for long. Thomas grabbed onto me. We both held tightly onto one of the old man's hands. He did not break his gaze from us. "I forgive you," I said. "It wasn't your fault." The faintest smile grew on his lips. He mouthed the final goodbye to us. Then he was gone. Cartwright and my grandmother attended the funeral. Both of them had pulled through, but only just. The two officers and Thomas helped Cartwright and then me to the cars, where we drove at ludicrous speeds back to town. We had to leave the two bodies there, the hunters and my grandfather's. I refused to go with them until they came back. I stayed in the rubble of the warehouse for a long time, just staring at the bodies. Eventually, I pulled the mask away from the man who had haunted me my whole life. The man who had taken my grandfather from me. He looked like anyone else. No defining features. Completely ordinary. The image of his face remained with me throughout the next couple of days. Thomas and Isabel worked with Grandma to organize the funeral. They called up distant family to visit. I was no help. I spent all my time staring off into the woods of my grandma's yard. I sat in a wheelchair due to my broken leg. I didn't need it, but I asked for it. The day of the funeral, I arrived at the small graveyard in the forest before all the other guests, all save for one. As I rolled my chair down the main path, I saw Cartwright in the distance. He looked at me as I made my way up to him. He stood in front of the graves of a husband and wife. He explained that he just wanted to let them know that he finally got the guy. Grandma acted stoic throughout the event, but I knew she was broken inside. I could tell, because I was too. After the funeral, her and I remained longer than anyone else. We talked for a while, but were silent for longer. Eventually, as dusk fell on the cemetery, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm gonna drive back home. I'm gonna make some supper. You're going to have your time alone, and then you'll come eat with your family." She kissed me on the forehead and was gone. I didn't say anything even as the sunlight fully slipped away. I simply pulled out the wooden mask from my bag and placed it beside Grandpa's headstone. I rolled my chair away, leaving the wooden masquerade as one final gift to my grandfather. I don't know if I actually forgive him or not. I wanted him to die at peace. I wanted him to have some closure. Maybe one day I'll have the same. All I know now is that I have to continue living, to try and earn the life we had fought so hard to preserve. And though I have some very rough years ahead of me, I try to look at the positive. Whatever the circumstances were, this man raised me. He made me into what I am. He looked after me. I may not have a good adult life, but I had a good childhood. And nothing can take that away from me.